Hello and welcome to our ongoing series of QHSE webinars presented by Mango. Hello to everyone joining us on the live webinar and a big hello to those viewing this as a recording. My name's Craig Thornton and I'm one of the owners here at Mango. Go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn I post QHSE articles daily from things I've picked up around the world and you might find them quite interesting. Jump onto my blog on my website and there we have details of how Mango created a quality management system and then achieved ISO 9001 certification. In addition, we have free resources area on the Mango website. There you can download free system manuals, free forms, free checklists, free presentations on things like internal auditing, health and safety, quality systems and environmental management. So just go to www.mangolive.com, click on the resources tab and download whatever you like. So on to today's topic. We're very fortunate today as we have New Zealand's leading asbestos expert. He is Ritchie Bower from Asbestos Environmental Consultants. I think you should check out Ritchie's profile on LinkedIn as his list of qualifications is quite something. I would be here all day listing them all to you. So over to you, Ritchie, for this really interesting topic.
Hi, thanks very much for that introduction, Craig. So what I'd like to do today is, over the next 20 or 30 minutes or so, is try and teach you a little bit about what is asbestos, where you may find it, the key legislation, health effects of asbestos, asbestos removal, talk a little bit about some of the projects that our consultants have been involved in. So my name is Richie Bower and I'm a director for AEC and Health, Safety, Environment New Zealand. I've worked in safety related roles for almost 20 years now, and I started my safety career in an asbestos lab testing and analytical business in the UK before moving into broader safety and hygiene roles in mining, maritime and oil and gas industry in West Australia. More recently, I worked as the Regional Compliance Manager for Maritime New Zealand. Maritime New Zealand is the National Maritime Safety and Response Regulator for Maritime and Offshore Affairs in New Zealand. During the presentation, I'm going to use the phrase PCBU multiple times. So before we start, I might just quickly take a moment just to explain who is a PCBU. So if you look at the WorkSafe website, they define a PCBU as a person conducting a business or an undertaking. It's a broad concept used throughout the Health and Safety at Work Act to describe all types of modern working arrangements, which we commonly refer to as businesses. Most New Zealand businesses, whether large corporates, sole traders or self-employed persons, are classed as PCBUs. So what is asbestos? The name asbestos comes from a Greek word meaning inextinguishable. The ancient Greeks were some of the first people to recognize the properties of this material many years ago. The Greeks and Romans would use asbestos to strengthen clay pots and to use as shrouds and tablecloths. During the Industrial Revolution, asbestos was mined extensively for its unique properties. So what is asbestos? Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral rock mined from the ground, and it was used in a variety of materials and products. Asbestos products are often made up of fibres that are so thin they can be invisible to the unaided eye. In New Zealand, records indicate asbestos was first imported in its raw form in the 1930s and was used in manufacturing in New Zealand up until 1987. New Zealand's first asbestos regulations came into force in 1978. For those of you based in Australia, asbestos is prevalent, particularly in the northwest of Western Australia, and can affect iron ore mining programs, drilling projects, roads and other infrastructure projects. The asbestos present is primarily chrysidolite or blue asbestos. And the photos that you're looking at there, the one on the right, is taken from Carragini Gorge near Tom Price. There are three main types of asbestos that are used in production and still exist in building materials today. Chrysotile, also known as white asbestos, is a serpentine mineral, most widespread and most commonly used, with estimates that up to 95% of all asbestos products using chrysotile. All the other asbestos types are known as amphibole minerals. The most commonly used are amosite, also referred to as brown or grey asbestos, and chrysidolite, also known as blue asbestos. Amphibole minerals are hydrophobic, which means they repel water, and this is why these were often added to cement-based products to reduce the drying time of these products and to increase speed of production. There are 3 other lesser-known types of asbestos, including fibrous actinolite, fibrous amphipholite, and fibrous tremolite, which were not mined commercially and are generally only found as trace contaminants in other mined materials such as vermiculite and talcum powder. Asbestos was considered a valuable product due to its resistance to fire, moisture, chemicals and heat, and also its suitability as an insulation product, and it has great acoustical insulation properties as well. Asbestos fibers have no detectable odor or taste. Asbestos fibers are inert solids that do not move through other solid objects such as walls and ceilings. It is due to the physical properties of the fibers that asbestos cause disease in people. The asbestos regulations in New Zealand and the supporting approved code of practice for the management and removal of asbestos refers extensively to friable and non-friable products. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what they are and what they look like. Non-friable may also be termed as bonded and includes asbestos-containing products that are tightly bound in a matrix of either cement, vinyl, or another material where the fibers are very difficult to liberate. Friable products are much more likely to release fibers, as these products degrade, the risk of fiber release can increase. The definition of a friable product in New Zealand is a product that can be crushed or pulverized by hand to dust. From a risk-based perspective, friable products pose much greater risk of exposure than non-friable, and the regulations and code of practice recognize that greater controls, skills, and qualifications are required to remove friable products. The regulations also recognize the need for air sampling to be conducted during the removal of friable products. This is to ensure that the workers involved in the removal and people in adjacent work areas aren't exposed to fibers during the removal process, or that exposure is reduced as far as reasonably practicable. And a couple of example photos on the slide there. The top one, you've got vinyl floor tiles, not in particularly good condition, but that is a bonded product. The fibers are bound and held within that vinyl matrix. And then below that, we have an example of a friable product, which is a Capasil calcium silicate amosite-based asbestos lagging that's obviously quite badly damaged and is releasing dust and debris. And just hiding under the yellow sample sticker there, 3906, there's actually an asbestos rope as well, used to seal where the two exhausts come together. So you've actually got a chrysotile rope and an amosite asbestos lagging in that photo. And then just moving through a few more examples of friable products. Just remember that friable, generally more higher risk, fibers are more likely to become airborne, and in New Zealand you do need a Class A license to remove these items. On the left there, just sitting above some acoustic ceiling tiles, you've got some blue asbestos limpet between the ceiling tile and the concrete ceiling. Off to the right there, you've got an asbestos rope around a redundant bend on a pipe. Often rope would be used around those difficult areas to lag, so rather than trying to lag around a bend or around a valve, that often the laggers would have some rope there that they could just quickly wrap round and move on to the next longer straight sections. And then that photo down the bottom right, not the best photo, but that is a rope seal to a boiler door. So you've got a chrysotile rope seal there on a door. You can actually find these chrysotile rope seals on older domestic cookers as well, so around the oven door and the like, so not unusual to find those in domestic premises. Just moving on, a few more examples of friable products. On the top right there, you've got a picture of some amosite sprayed limpet. That's a structural beam, where the sample sticker is, that structural beam. You've got a concrete ceiling. this particular product was extremely difficult to remove because the concrete ceiling wasn't particularly smooth, and at the time of application back in the 1960s they'd used a bitumen adhesive so that when they blew that product onto the concrete ceiling it stuck there, and even 50 years later it was still very, very stuck there. Down on the left you've got some pipe insulation. That pipe insulation, the insulation itself is actually non-asbestos, but for whatever reason they wrap the pipes with a paper-based product which contained chrysotile white asbestos. So although the lagging to the untrained eye would have appeared to be a synthetic fibre, a non-asbestos type, actually underneath it, at the full depth of the core sample was able to identify a paper product. And then off to the right there, you've just got another example where they've used rope, asbestos rope insulation around a pipe. Okay, so a few examples of non-friable or bonded products, as sometimes referred to. On the left there, you've got a bitumen sink pad on the draining underside of a draining board on a sink. And then to the right there, you've got a cement infill panel. Unfortunately, on this particular panel, the electrician, rather than just maybe working around it, decided to put his hammer through it so that he could run his cables to wherever he needed to run his cables. Not an unusual scenario that we do see when we're out on site. And then moving on, some other uses of non-friable cement products. We've got some baffles, window baffles there to protect the building from the sun during the heat of the day. That particular product, quite a thick piece of cement. To the untrained eye, it probably would look like it was a timber or a metal product. Sampling analysis of that showed that it contained chrysotile white asbestos. And then the photo to the right there, you've got another example of a bonded product, which is a soffit lining. They're well used throughout New Zealand, both on domestic and commercial properties. And to be honest, where can asbestos be found? Well, it can be found pretty much anywhere. Asbestos has been used in over 3,000 products in home and industry. The automotive industry has used asbestos in brake shoes, valve packing materials and clutch facings. The building industry, which is responsible for the vast majority of asbestos use, and asbestos can be found almost anywhere in buildings. A partial list of these building products could include pipe insulation, vinyl floor tiles, bitumen adhesives, vinyl floor coverings, acoustic and decorative plasters, cement products such as wall boards, panels, downpipes, flues, roof vents, ducting, sheets, roof shingles. Heating and electrical ducts can contain asbestos, textured paints, roofing felts, spray applied insulation, even vinyl wall coverings, and all sorts of other sealants. Friable asbestos use was discontinued in the late 1970s, but these products can still be present in buildings today. So I'm going to cover just a couple of what I feel are the key pieces of legislation when it comes to managing asbestos. Firstly, it's worth noting that the asbestos import ban in New Zealand only came into force in October 2016. That meant that it was quite legitimate for people to import asbestos into New Zealand up until October last year, which was well behind most other westernised countries. For example, Australia brought their import ban in 2005, and the UK's import ban came in 1999. So up on the screen there, you've got Regulation 10. Regulation 10 is the key regulation that requires the PCBU, who manages or controls a workplace, to identify and assess asbestos-containing materials in that workplace. The next regulation that I believe is a key one for PCBUs to be familiar with in New Zealand is Regulation 13. That requires that a PCBU who manages and controls the workplace prepares an asbestos management plan. It's worth noting that Regulation 10 entered into force in 2016, whereas Regulation 13 doesn't enter into force until April 2018. Regulation 13 is covered by the transitional arrangements that are at the back of the health and safety regulations. It's also worth noting that to prepare an asbestos management plan, one of the first steps in the process is to identify what materials you have in your workplace. If you don't know what materials you've got, you cannot prepare your asbestos management plan. My view is that the regulator is now giving people a little bit of a grace period to get the house in order, to prepare their asbestos management plan. However, the requirement to identify and assess is already a requirement that's in place now. One of the other key requirements, I believe, is Regulation 17, and that's the duty to train workers about asbestos. The PCBU must ensure that workers who are engaged by the PCBU and who the PCBU reasonably believes may be involved in asbestos removal work or in the carrying out of asbestos-related work are trained in the identification and safe handling of and suitable control measures for asbestos and ACM. Good quality training to workers such as plumbers, carpenters, construction trades, etc., I believe would go a long way to reducing their exposure risks. So just looking at an excerpt from the WorkSafe Code of Practice for the Management and Removal of Asbestos, we've got an overview of a high-level overview for developing an asbestos management plan. So there you go. First, number one, identify asbestos in your workplace. This needs to be done by an asbestos surveyor who has sufficient training, qualifications, knowledge, and experience. It's also useful that the surveyor can demonstrate independence. This should mean your surveyor should also not be your asbestos removalist. If you are using your asbestos removalist as your surveyor, don't be surprised when they tell you everything needs removing now. 2, assess the risks. Upon completion of the survey and return of the sampling results, the surveyor will generate an asbestos survey report. This report should include a risk assessment of identified asbestos items. This risk assessment can be used by the PCBU as a basis for decisions around how to manage and control asbestos that has been identified. The asbestos risk assessment is determined based on the likelihood that fibres can be inhaled and could include reference to the product type, i.e. is it bonded or friable? Is the product in good condition or otherwise? Is it likely to be disturbed or easily released fibres? Is the product sealed, enclosed or unsealed? What is the occupant activity in the area the material is located, and how much of the material is present? The report should also include photos and site layout plans indicating the locations of samples or asbestos containing materials at the workplace. 3, develop an asbestos management plan. The AMP sets out how the workplace will manage identified ACM, and it'll also document things like roles and responsibilities for asbestos materials at the site, what to do in asbestos emergencies, what training the workplace is going to provide workers, things like site induction, and then it will also cover point 4, your processes for accident, incident and emergency reporting. And it might also include things like asbestos awareness, site induction, and then it may also talk about periodic air monitoring, further re-inspections of identified materials. So there's a whole range of things that could be covered in an asbestos management plan. That's just a few. And then review the asbestos management plan's effectiveness. So the regulations require that the asbestos management plan be reviewed at least every 5 years, but they also do refer to that plan being reviewed if there's been any issues, any incidents, asbestos has been removed, or there's been any work involving asbestos at the site. So why does New Zealand require asbestos legislation? Well, asbestos-related disease in New Zealand results in around 170 to 180 New Zealanders dying every year. The table that you're looking at was released by WorkSafe in 2013 and provides a good indication of the high-risk work exposure groups. The number of deaths could actually be a low number given the difficulties with the diagnosis of asbestos-related ill health versus other health-related issues such as smoking. It is clear from the pie chart that carpenters, plumbers and electricians are together responsible for 2/3 of all asbestos-related cases in New Zealand. These construction workers are an occupational category at risk because, unlike asbestos workers, for example, they are not always seen as being at obvious risk. The non-occupational category in the chart refers to cases where an individual's exposure was not work-related. This could include cases resulting from secondary or environmental exposure, such as children brought up in the home of an asbestos worker or people who washed asbestos-contaminated clothes. The no known exposure category refers predominantly to mesothelioma cases where conclusive exposure histories were not available. It's worth noting at this point that the time delay is often 20 to 50 years from initial exposure to illness, and often the exposures have been forgotten, were never even realized at the time, and the surviving family members are unaware. So what are the known health effects of asbestos? Well, the most common diseases caused by exposure to asbestos include asbestosis, which is caused by inhaling asbestos fibers, generally over a long period of time at quite high levels of exposure, which causes scarring or fibrosis of the lung tissue, which decreases the ability of the lungs to transfer oxygen to the blood. The latency period for asbestosis is generally between 20 and 50 years. This means that you could be exposed as a tradie in your 20s and not develop symptoms for many, many years after, maybe in your 50s, 60s, or even your 70s. Mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is a cancer of the outer covering of the lung, the pleura, or the abdominal cavity, the peritoneum. Mesothelioma is only caused by inhalation of the needle-like asbestos fibers deep into the lungs, where they can damage the mesothelial cells, potentially resulting in cancer. Asbestos removal. It's worth noting that a PCBU that commissions asbestos removal at their workplace must ensure that the asbestos removal work is carried out by a licensed asbestos removalist who is licensed for the type of work that they're going to be conducting. The PCBU must limit access to the asbestos removal area, and they must ensure clearance inspections are conducted by an independent, competent, or licensed asbestos assessor for Class A works. So I'll just cover that one again. For Class B removal works, the assessor is required to be independent and competent. For Class A works, it's required to be a licensed asbestos assessor. Now, those licensed assessors, there's a list on the WorkSafe website, so you can go there to check. Likewise with asbestos removalists, there's a list on the WorkSafe website listing what type of license they hold and what type of work they can conduct. The PCBU that is commissioning works must make sure that air monitoring is also conducted when work requiring a Class A license is being carried out. This must also be done by a licensed asbestos assessor. The workplace PCBU who knows licensed asbestos removal work is being carried out at the workplace must make sure that people at the workplace are informed about the removal work and provide them with appropriate information. And they must take reasonable steps to make sure that people in the immediate vicinity, such as the general public or nearby tenants, are also informed of the asbestos removal. Just on the slide there, you've just got a brief overview of what the different license categories can do. So you've got a Class A license there who can remove any amount of friable asbestos or ACM, any amount of ACD, which is asbestos containing dust, and any amount of non-friable asbestos or asbestos-containing material. So a Class A removalist can remove any amount of and any type of asbestos. And you've got a Class B license holder. They can remove any amount of non-friable asbestos, so bonded products or asbestos-containing material, and they can remove asbestos-containing dust associated with the removal of those non-friable or bonded products. So that just recognises that whilst removing, say, a cement fence line, there will be the odd occasion where dust will be released, fragments will be released, and it makes complete sense that that Class B license holder also clean up those items while they're there. You'll note on the asterisk that by 2018, all Class A removalists are required to have a certified safety management system. So just a bit of a flavour of a few of the projects that both Health, Safety, Environment New Zealand and Asbestos Environmental Consultants have been involved in. We've been involved in helping some government agencies with high-risk asbestos removals from within industrial units, responding to the earthquake down in Wellington, undertaking urgent hazardous material inspections through buildings that were affected by the earthquakes, going through those buildings, assessing them for an immediate asbestos risk, and where required, undertaking airborne fibre monitoring to qualify those risk assessments. In June this year, we was over in Papua New Guinea for a few weeks with HSE New Zealand, undertaking vessel safety management and health and safety inspection audits and visits. And when I was working in West Australia, I was fortunate enough to be involved in a couple of high-profile projects. The West Atlas Montara field, PTEP rig that was involved in the fire there. Their rig, which was built in 2007, it was subsequently identified it had asbestos on board, and we needed to get involved and work with the wreck removal crews to make sure that the asbestos was removed safely and in line with Australian standards and requirements. And also heavily involved with removing 16 tonne of mainly friable asbestos off a large oil tanker conversion to a FPSO over in the Philippines. Day one on that job was quite interesting. 200 Filipino workers turned up to remove friable asbestos, and not one of them had a respirator. So there's a fair bit of work involved in training and bringing those guys up to speed to undertake the task safely. But I'm quite proud to say we was able to actually not only get these guys up to speed, but we got them fully kitted out. There was, without doubt, the most professional and well kitted out asbestos removalists in the whole of the Philippines by the time we'd finished with them. And they certainly wouldn't look out of place operating over in Australia. They really raised the bar on that job, and that was mainly thanks to the client's insistence that we used Australian standards as the standard. We wasn't to work to the local standard. So that was an interesting project that I was personally involved in. And then just a bit of an overview of what HSE New Zealand and Asbestos Environmental Consultants offer. Obviously, Asbestos Environmental Consultants, we specialise in asbestos and hazardous materials survey and management, asbestos removal project management. We have a number of WorkSafe New Zealand licensed asbestos assessors, and we undertake airborne contaminant and personal exposure monitoring and laboratory testing services. HSE New Zealand specialise in health and safety, international safety management code and environmental audits and inspections. They provide ISO 9001, 14001, 18001 management systems using Mango as our preferred tool of delivery of these products. HSE New Zealand also provides services around workplace and property risk assessment, contractor management and pre-qualification, root cause and liability investigations, and noise assessment, monitoring and management. That's me finished. Thank you very much, Craig.
Okay, thank you for that, Richie. Excellent. So I've just got a couple of questions for me. So the previous slide there, that you talked about the Class A's require a certified safety management system. What do you mean by certified safety management system?
Yeah, so in New Zealand, the regulators recognise that a company that has a safety management system in place is much more likely to be able to comply with not only with its legislative requirements, but it's more likely to keep its people safe in the workplace. Given the high risk work that the Class A removalists are involved in, that requirement, which comes in April 2018, requires that a removalist develop a safety management system to either the Australian standard 4801 or the international OHSAS 18001 standards. Both of those standards are going to be replaced in the near future, I believe, by 45001. So they're required to develop that safety management system in accordance with that, and then have that safety management system independently verified and certified by one of the certification bodies approved by JASANS. So what we're doing with that is we've had a number of removalist approaches. It's quite a big step for these guys to go to a full certified safety management system. They often have quite detailed procedures around the technical work that they're involved in. But the broader components of a safety management system are probably quite new. And what we're finding is that, a lot of companies that don't have detailed policies, they don't maintain a lot of records of training. The current way they manage safety on site is often paper-based, particularly. There's a lot of things these guys have got to do. The daily pre-start checks, they've got to do enclosure checks, they've got to do smoke tests, they've got to maintain a lot of records around air monitoring, health monitoring, face fits, medical certification. There's a lot of documentation. And what we're finding is that the ability to have that information in the cloud using Mango as a tool just allows the supervisors on site to become a lot more paper-free. It's a lot friendly when the regulator comes up on site using the smartphones. They're very quickly able to show the regulator that the guys on site are trained, they're competent, they hold the face fits, they've got the medicals. All that information in the cloud is much easier for these guys to manage than in the back seat of the truck in and amongst a lot of paperwork.
Excellent. Thanks. So Tania's got a question. When it comes to AMPs for commercial premises, is it the responsibility of the landlord or the commercial tenant, as both are PCBUs, to obtain and pay for the AMP for the building? Whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. It's one that we get quite a lot, actually. So under the broader Health and Safety at Work Act, that brought in, and part of the idea around PCBUs is it brings in overlapping responsibilities. So the answer to that question is you're both responsible. Now, the Health and Safety at Work Act wants people to communicate, consult, coordinate efforts. It doesn't want you both to go out and develop a management plan. It wants you to talk to each other and collectively produce that asbestos management plan. So it's really about discussing the tenant, the landlord, the owner. Those guys have got to get together, they've got to talk, and they've got to produce a management plan. And ultimately, if no one does it, the regulator could hold all parties accountable for that not being done. So it's better that people work together, consult, coordinate, communicate, and put that management plan in place.
Do landlords know this information? Because I really sort of haven't heard a lot, because we're a landlord as well, and we didn't really know about this.
Yeah, look, it's not unusual that I believe WorkSafe have actually done a very good job trying to push these new regulations. You can go on the WorkSafe website and there's a lot of information on there around asbestos. Our landlords aware, probably not as aware as what we'd like them to be, but also at the same time, that sometimes those landlords will try and abrogate responsibility to the tenant. Because there's sometimes a commercial basis for that. It's contractually, they might have an agreement in place where they don't take care of any of the maintenance. But ultimately, when it comes down to the health and safety of people, if someone is exposed or asbestos isn't being managed properly, the regulator could well knock on everyone's door asking the question, why hasn't this management plan been put in place?
So, which lead Tani has come with another excellent follow-up question regarding exactly just what you've just said is what would be the recommendation if one party, either the landlord or the tenant, does not want to do it? What's your recommendation?
Well, look, the idea behind identifying products in the workplace is to make sure people aren't exposed. So at the end of the day, if you're a tenant and the landlord refuses to do it, then if I was that tenant, I'd take it on the chin. I've got to put this in place. It's protecting my people at the end of the day. It's my workplace. I have a responsibility as well, regardless of whether the landlord doesn't want to come to the party. But ultimately, do make an effort to speak, do share that information, maybe even offer to offset the cost, hey, we'll go halvesy on this, if everyone can come to the party and have a sensible discussion, you'll often find that 99% of the time you'll get a good result.
Because you're adding value to the building by doing this type of stuff anyway, aren't you? So it's good for the landlord. They can see the value of the building going up by doing this work.
That's right. And look, what you don't know, you can't manage, So the flip side of it is a little bit like insurance. No one likes paying for it. But if you've got your asbestos register in place, then you're far less likely to have an issue such as a contractor coming onto site, conducting work and leaving a trail of dust and debris behind that can subsequently turn out to be asbestos. And that cleanup can cost you infinitely more than what just having that initial inspection and that asbestos register put in place would have cost.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure whether you'd be able to answer this one, but I'm just interested why New Zealand was so far behind the UK at 1999 and Australia at 2005 for the asbestos import ban. Why here in New Zealand were we so far behind the eight ball?
I'm not really sure I can answer that question. You'd probably have to speak with Customs or the EPA. No, I mean, look, it's interesting when you see all the problems they're having in Australia with building products coming in from parts of Asia that are being used on, even like the Perth Children's Hospital. A huge amount of asbestos wallboard has been installed there over the last couple of years, and it was all supposed to be asbestos-free. Part of the issue with purchasing asbestos-free products from places like China is that their definition of asbestos is quite different to ours. Mm-hmm. For example, they don't believe cryostar white asbestos is toxic. So in some parts of Asia, that isn't even considered an asbestos material. So if you go to, say, China and say, I want this product, but I want it to be asbestos-free, they could quite well give you a product that they deem asbestos-free, but we don't. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of issues in Australia, and you've got to imagine that the same types of products will be coming into New Zealand. So I imagine New Zealand Customs and Border Control will be very closely watching what's happening in Australia and probably putting in place similar risk profiling tools to identify the types of products and material that may well be coming across the border here.
Mm-hmm. Alistair's got an interesting question because this is the same question that we've got here on our site here. What about plans for new builds, say built in the last year? So, for example, here our building was built halfway through last year. So we still have to have an AMP, is that right? And
that's not as clear. So the survey guidance around asbestos surveys and the code of practice kind of refer to the year 2000 as being a cutoff. Mm-hmm. So they talk about, look, buildings built pre-2000 have a greater risk of there being asbestos present, and they must have an asbestos survey conducted, which kind of gives the impression that buildings built after 2000 shouldn't be a problem. But as we know from watching what's happening in Australia, that there is still a risk, albeit it's much lower than it in older buildings. Where we have been involved in asbestos products being a real problem in new building is ships. So we've been involved in assessing a number of ships over in Southeast Asia. ships that have been purchased by European, Australian companies, New Zealand companies, and those ships are being built to local standards, and you're often finding that those ships have a huge amount of asbestos in gaskets and insulation, and they're traveling around the world, and people are absolutely unaware that in this day and age that asbestos products could still be used on board.
Okay. Sam's got an interesting one. When do companies have to have asbestos surveys and AMPs in place?
I think I covered that, but
Yes.
if I wasn't clear, so asbestos surveys, the requirement to have an asbestos survey came in April 2016. So if you haven't got an asbestos survey now, you really do need to get one.
Yep.
April 2018 is the date that your asbestos management plan needs to be in place, unless you already have one. And then if you already have one, you're supposed to continue maintaining the asbestos management plan.
Right.
So I believe that the reason that it was set up like that was the 2-year grace period. So the April 2018 for the management plan really gave businesses 2 years to put in place the surveys and then look at the risk assessments and then develop the management plans. So my belief is that come April 2018, WorkSafe may well move from that sort of training, education and awareness approach to probably a little bit more enforcement and compliance action around businesses that haven't got it in place.
Okay, excellent. Tania's got another good follow-up question. As part of the sale and purchase, sorry, it's just moved up the page. As part of the sale and purchase of commercial buildings, will real estate agents ensure that an AMP is provided with buildings that require one, or is it down to the purchaser to do their due diligence?
Yeah, look, I think initially it's down to the purchasers to do some due diligence. However, if a building has a survey, an asbestos register, an asbestos management plan, and that building's been sold, then it's reasonable that that information should also transfer across with the building. The building owner, or the owner of that documentation, the reason that documentation is in place is so you can share it with other workers, other PCBUs, to prevent any unwanted asbestos exposure. So, I don't see any reason why, if that's already in place, that wouldn't go with the sale of a building.
Right. Another question here from Tania. Tania's on fire here. One company I worked for had a contractor who was exposed to asbestos from grinding brick mortar here in New Zealand. Luckily, he identified the mortar, looked fibrous and stopped work. However, most asbestos service providers are telling contractors that mortar is not a potential ACM in New Zealand. What are your thoughts?
I think, asbestos, as I've referred to during the presentation, you can find asbestos in almost every building product. The key to identifying it is having someone that's trained and competent go through and take samples. Those samples can then be analysed by an accredited laboratory, and they can categorically tell us whether those products contain asbestos or not. So I think the key is a survey that is supported by asbestos sampling by trained and competent persons. Now, it's worth noting that you don't have to take samples of materials when you're doing a survey. The Code of Practice and the associated guidelines do allow for competent persons to make an assumption of whether a product contains asbestos or not. So for those companies that might be tight on budget, you can't afford to spend a lot of money on sampling, that is an approach. It's not an approach that we often support, simply because you can often end up managing a lot more material that isn't asbestos that way. So we believe that in the long term it is more cost effective to take samples and actually identify what does contain asbestos, rather than long term potentially managing non-asbestos products as asbestos, if that makes sense.
So Tani has replied, thanks Richie. We're finding that they won't even go on site. They're saying it does not need to be surveyed. That's where the contractors are getting confused.
Yeah, look, if there's a product there, there's a suspect product there, the product should be sampled and tested, and you should find out once and for all whether it contains asbestos or not.
Yeah, okay. Here's a question from Bill. I know Bill's a consultant. AMPs, is this an area of opportunity for health and safety consultants to work with companies like yours to help their own clients / prospective clients without doubling up in efforts between your company and them? Is that something
Yeah,
you want
look,
to work with health and safety consultants?
yeah, oh, absolutely. Look, you know, the a lot of the guts of a asbestos management plan is probably the guts of a broader safety management plan. So we, you know, in the asbestos management plan, we talk about dealing with emergencies, incident and accident reporting. All of those items are things that good companies would already have in their safety management systems. So in the perfect world, particularly for larger organisations, the asbestos management plan would become part of the broader safety management plan anyway. It wouldn't be a standalone document. It would form part of that overall systemic safety approach.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, we're at the 45-minute. We've run out of questions, so that was excellent, Richie. Much appreciated, and thank you for your time. And obviously, if people have got any questions, you're more than welcome to contact me, or you can contact Richie on those contact things there on the slide. You're more than welcome to jump onto his website. So Richie's quite popular on LinkedIn as well, so I think you should all probably link in with Richie and ask him lots of questions there as well. So so I'll end it there. Thank you, Richie.
Thanks for your time, Craig.
Okay, and thank you all for attending. So look out for the next webinar. It's the end of September because I'm taking a wee break and having a wee holiday. So look out for that. That's going to be the 29th of September. So I hope you all have a great day, and thank you all for attending.